Alright, good morning and welcome back to my version of patch reviews where Jansport tells me what cards are being changed and then I say what I hope will be the change and what I expect the change to be, and then we'll watch the video and see what they are in reality land. But my first thoughts, just hearing that these are the things that were getting changed, was that they obviously missed Cartwheels and Samira Varus, right? Like there's nothing here about Samira Varus or Cartwheels, right? So that's like a very obvious miss, but that's because they couldn't have seen the card gamer lineup before the open, which is a little interesting that when they submit balance, it's before the open. That could be a concern for future. These are like the obvious misses that I've noticed, but I also was like super surprised by Azir and Nasus. I couldn't figure out what to do with them. But let's quickly go over what these are and what I hope will be changed and what I think will be changed. Starting with Azir and Nasus, I genuinely had no clue. I spent like so much time thinking about what could possibly be changed with Azir or Nasus, and I came up with nothing, basically, that I could hope for. There was stuff about like their level 3. Clearly Glory's Call, Azir and Nasus all hint towards like a level 3 being impacted in some capacity, but I genuinely have no clue. One of the things I was thinking about was making it so that Azir doesn't give +1/+0 when something is summoned. It's just like an aura, like units have +1/+0, which is okay, I guess. That's such a minor buff. I don't think it matters for how like the Azir decks want to play it. It almost makes Azir less like his deck. And so these are my expectations, just that the level up condition will go down by 1 and the stats go increase by 1/1. It could be something about their level 3s, but I don't exactly know what. Unless like Azir draws 2 cards and Nasus gives -4 or -5. Like I don't know what could have happened here. Glory's Call, I thought they might do 3 less instead of cost 2 less for each ascended ally. That's the only thing you can really do for Glory's Call. You can't really make it 5 mana unless you want it to cost like 3 or 1, which I think is like a lot less visually appealing as a number, just because the third one only reduces it by 1 instead of 2 at that point. So I thought maybe they'll make Glory's Call 3 less for each ascended ally. I think that's a really interesting change, and it could make Glory's Call maybe be played. I tried playing Glory's Call once. It wasn't the worst thing in the world. Priestess of Desert Light. I think it makes sense to give it a 5th point of health based on how Priestess of Desert Light wants to work. So 4/5 or 3/5. I hope for 3/5 if they do it and not 4/5. I think 3/5 is a bit more interesting, but I could see a world where it's 4/5. But the Shreema cards, I'm not entirely too excited about them. Most of these ideas don't interest me too much unless Azir and Nasus get really interesting changes here. Then maybe I'll be more interested in them. But for now, like the Shreema stuff doesn't interest me. But we'll see what the stream actually says. But the Targon stuff really interests me because I'm a big fan of Targon. But Moondream is weird. I kind of want Moondreamer to have another line of text. I don't want it to be anything too complicated, but even something just like saying augment or, you know, an aura where celestial allies cost, have like 1 more health or something, or, you know, I have 1 strength for each celestial ally or something like that. Something that could impact Moondreamer could be interesting like that. Because the only other thing you can do with Moondreamer besides adding text is adding stats, and I don't really want Moondreamer to add stats. I think having a 3/6 as a 5-mana unit is a really interesting stat line that we don't have that much of in this game. So I want to see like a good 5-mana 3/6 exist, and so giving Moondreamer some text, just like 1 basic line of text, could be more interesting to me than something like a 4/6, which is a fine stat line. It'll see a lot more play if it's a 4/6, but it's not as interesting to me. The Cloven Way, I thought one of the few ways you can change this without increasing the stats is simply to make this Nightfall stun again, as opposed to Nightfall to do any sort of stun. I do think this makes the card less thematic. I really like the idea of a big Nightfall unit that does have stun and overwhelm. I think the way the Cloven Way is made is really nice. I wouldn't have put Cloven Way on a buff list if like I could create the buff list, but this is what has been buffed, and so if I was to do it, it would be something like this. Just put the stun here. If it's stats, I'm going to assume it's 1 point of strength. It could be 1 point of health. It doesn't really bother me either way. It could be a massive change, like Leona-esque changes. But I really like the way the Cloven Way is right now. I think it's a really interesting card that can create a lot of interesting gameplay states. And so I don't see a need to even do this change. But if a change is to occur, I want it to be this as opposed to any other change. Cygnus the Moonstalker, it's stats. I don't know what else I could possibly think about for Cygnus the Moonstalker besides a massive change. Maybe he has permanent elusive. Maybe the elusive he gives is a grant to the ally but not to himself. Something like that. You could give him an extra point of health. Moonstalker interests me less than the Cloven Way as a sneaky Targonian card. Both of these I'm not like the most excited about. Targonian Telstones is interesting. This is a card I've obviously want nerfed for a long, long time. And so seeing this in the buff category is a little bit weird. Obviously, Wish is like the weirdest card in the Targonian Telstones. It has such few use case conditions that you can't justify running Wish that often in, like, at all. While Sunblessed Vigor is one of those cards that has use sometimes, and it being costed 3 mana is a big issue for Sunblessed Vigor because it's not that powerful of a card, it's just okay. So I do like the idea of doing Wish into Sunblessed Vigor. And I could see a world where, you know, Paddlestar and Fallen Star are pretty similar cards. I could see a world where they just want to make Paddlestar into Fallen Star. I would prefer and expect something along the lines of just Wish into Sunblessed Vigor, but Paddlestar Fallen Star I think is also in a possible line. Soul Harvest. I am very surprised to see this here, and this is the only thing I can think of that wouldn't be insane. Right? Like, there's no way they're going to make it 1 mana to remove something for 3, and there's no way they're going to, I don't know, increase it to 4 strength? So, like, this is the only thing I can possibly think about for Soul Harvest that wouldn't be insane. So, unless it can remove landmarks, but that doesn't make sense. It's like a knife at the neck. You can't knife neck landmarks. I've tried. They've done a pretty common thing very recently to just -1 cost for awkward SI cards. I'm thinking Wraith of Echoes. I'm pretty sure Neverglade Collector had that happen at one point. So often their result for SI units is to increase the cost or decrease the cost by 1. Obviously on the other side you've got like Viego. So they've obviously minus the cost of a few other things recently. I think they've got to change the cost of something in this expansion. And Deathless Knight seems like that a very common card. I don't think it would be too scary at 5 mana. They might reduce like -1 strength if they do it to 5 mana, but you know. By the way, I put equals fail here because try not to do something challenge fail. I thought was a funny joke. Mirror Image. Again, another card I really did not expect them to buff, considering they clearly know, like, Ash Reckoning is decent right now. So, the only possible buff I can think of for Mirror Image is that it doesn't fizzle if the strength is reduced. You actually have to kill the unit to fizzle it. So, if I Frostbite an enemy LeBlanc and they Mirror Image their LeBlanc, it'll create a 0/5 LeBlanc. That way, it doesn't get saddened into things like Troll Chant and, importantly, like Scrying Sands. But, genuinely, I don't know. It could start with 1 mana. That wouldn't be bad. Maybe it doesn't have the 5 strength barrier, but I don't know. A lot of these cards, I'm very surprised that they got changed. These are very weird cards to choose, in my opinion. Like, Targonian Telstones makes sense. I think, depending on what they do with the Azir and Nasus, it can make sense, but... And Deathless Knight makes sense, but everything else, like Cygnus and Cadragrin and Mirror Image, are just very weird to me. Retired Reckoner makes a lot of sense for a change. I think you could do a bunch of things with it. My hope is that it gets reduced in mana, but has less stats, obviously, because it's a unit that gets stats. It's fine to reduce its stats, but getting 1 less mana means you can start using it as an engine. A 5 mana non-tempo engine is really, really awkward because it's only turn 6 and turn 7 that the engine actually does something. But 4 mana means that this engine can do stuff on turn 5 and turn 6. And 5 and 6 attacks are way more important than 6 and 7 and 8 attacks, right? There's such a difference in the earliness of the onboarding of your engines. So I think making this 4 mana would be really nice. I don't have that high of a hope. It might just be a 5 mana 3/6, but this is what I hope could occur. Cadragon the Infernal. I didn't end up going to Twitter to double check what this was because I'm going to assume Twitter has all the changes already. So I didn't want to double check. Like Aragorn said something like 10 mana when I summon all dragons at the top of your deck. You know, it's some sort of late game bomb akin to that of Ledros and Arakan. And the expectation is that Aragorn manipulated the system and actually got his change through. In Reality Land, I have no clue. I expect something like a full rework. It's no longer 9 mana. It's some sort of like 7 mana thing. That's my expectation for Cadragon. Both of these were mostly just jokes that I wanted to put in. But Cadragon, I think they could do interesting things with Cadragon. So I'm curious to see what they do. Bandle Gunner. I think changing the amount of impact to be the amount of regions you've summoned for him is really interesting. You could reduce the stats so that it's got like a 5/5 stat line or something. But I think this is an interesting way of making the card trying to empower Swarm and multi-region strategies even more than it already does. I really like Bandle Gunners. I already think Bandle Gunners is not like a bad card. I used to run it in like Tristana SI. And it's a very fun and enjoyable card. So I could see a world where I don't want to buff it too much. But if I was to do it, I think this is how I'd do it. What I expect though is just a +1/+1 on the stats. So it's got 3 8s on the card and then a 4. And it's all, you know, nice looking and stuff. Advanced Intel. I have always wanted a Caitlyn card that says move all flash bombs in the enemy deck up 1 or 2 cards, right? That's something I've always wanted. I've wanted something that creates a token that does that, and some of the card ideas that Roma and I work on involve getting Caitlyn cards to move cards up. So something like a 1 mana, like put all the flash bombs in the enemy deck, or even just all the traps, but all the flash bombs in the enemy deck up 2 cards, I think is really interesting. It might have to have another effect, because that being main decked would be awful. You would really want this as a token. But I think some sort of idea like that. Maybe it's just plant flu 2 flash bombs and move all flash bombs 2 up. That could be a way you could do it. Make it 2 mana or something. What I expect is plant 2 to plant 3. You can tell I'm not particularly high on the things that they might do to Advanced Intel, or a lot of these cards, but that's what I would want. I want Advanced Intel to say, flash bombs in the enemy deck, move up 2 cards so that they're more likely to draw them on the next turn. Nerfs. Ash, I think we'll just go 4 Frostbites. I hope is 4 Frostbites to 5 Frostbites. I think one of the things I find really weird with Ash is, like, her variance in leveling up is really, really stark. Sometimes she levels up on turn 4, sometimes she levels up on turn 8. And so by having it be +1 more, you're removing some of, like, the higher variant stuff while retaining a lot of her win condition aspect, which is you've frozen the entire board. I think this is very safe for Ash, that she just goes to 5 Frostbites and we're, like, a little bit able to not worry about the high variance lose conditions of them just turbo leveling Ash with the harsh winds at burst speed open. Reckoning, there's not too many numbers on this card, so I think you just make it 7 mana. You could make it so that it doesn't kill 4 strength units, it only kills 3 strength units and less. But still, you need a 5 strength unit to start the slicer. I think could be interesting, but it seems like a lot of text, and I'm imagining it's more likely to just be 7 mana. But this is actually a card I wouldn't want to nerf, so that's why a lot of these cards, I'm curious about why they picked this card over other options. All Out. I want to make a quick aside here about cards like All Out and Burblefish. One thing I really like about this format is that I'm not saying this is what I want to have changed, right? Before I know what these cards are, any suggestion I make has an implicit secondary argument, which is I think this archetype should be changed. As opposed to having what card names are being changed, I can go after that and say, okay, provided that these archetypes are being nerfed or buffed, this is what it should be like. It's a very different argument. So before, obviously, the live stream, people were saying we should nerf All Out, or we should nerf Burblefish, we should nerf Inferno, we should nerf Samira, we should nerf X, Y, Z. There are all of these things, but all of those arguments say implicitly this sort of archetype should be nerfed. I'm not willing to say that. That's not something that interests me that much. Saying X archetype should be nerfed, X archetype should be buffed doesn't interest me. What interests me more is the methods in which they buff the very specific cards they choose to nerf and buff, and provided that they want to nerf an archetype, what can we do post that? That's a more interesting question to me, and that's what I care about more. This is just a side point, because I think when people see All Out and Samira and Burblefish, it's very explicitly obvious to a lot of people that these things should get hit. I honestly don't care about that argument. I will play the video game no matter what, even if they nerf none of these cards and Samira Fizz is still the best deck in the format or whatever, or Samira Varus. That doesn't bother me too much. So seeing this and gets rid of that first like issue of what should be nerfed or buffed and just goes into the how should we nerf or buff it. Anyway, All Out. What I would want is All Out to be a 2 mana +3, and then if you proc Plunder +2. I think this is my favorite form of changing this card. It makes it so that like this is very demonstrably worse than Elixir of Wrath and like Might, but if you proc Plunder, it becomes better Sharpened Resolve. While this, I think, is just like too powerful, generally speaking. I don't like the ones where it's 2 and 1, only because like poor pocket aces. Poor pocket aces. But sure. I mean, this is a Noxus card and pocket aces is a Buildwater card, but I really want like Plunder +2/+1 to be the pocket aces thing, not the All Out thing. So I quite like the idea of it being slightly bigger, 2 mana +3, and then if you proc Plunder +2 health. Burbly. I expect it to be 6 mana to 7 mana. My expectation, obviously, a very reasonable expectation, is that instead it always creates Bloodbait, just so everyone has the amazing response of getting Bloodbait. This is yet another joke. You can tell I do the Stolen Conch thing, as the more I write this, the more willing I am to break the format and just do jokes. So, obviously, I don't actually expect this, just to, you know, I'll put a /s marker there. But this is what I expect and hope. But I think this is a really funny thing to write. I just think, you know, this is a very humorous thing to say to people. Inferno 1-5 to 1-4. I think this is most people's expectation for Inferno. I'm not going to go too deep into it. This is a very easy, let's make Inferno slightly worse thing. Leona, 4 day breaks into 5 day breaks. I really like the way in which Leona stabilizes the board. I really like her stat line. I think it's really interesting. I like the way that she comes into the board and does whatever she does. I think if you want to make the Leona mid-range Leona mid-range beat other mid-range and aggro strategy to be less powerful, you just hit her level up condition. So like Leona does many things. She is aggro, but she also beats aggro. She's mid-range, but she also beats mid-range. And she can also beat control. To make those the beating conditions against aggro and mid-range slightly less strong, I think you could make it so that it's harder for her to get repeated stuns. And to do that, you can increase her Daybreak amount, right? That's my line for trying to make Leona less strong into certain methods. And Sun Guardian, I think this is a relatively desired change. I think Sun Guardian as a repeatedly growing stat stick is really interesting. Now, I know, repeatedly growing stat stick and interesting is not something that people often say together. But it's something that we don't actually really have as much in this game besides stuff like Vanguard First Blade. We don't have cards like Sun Guardian that much. Maybe I'm missing something, and maybe they're just underpowered, and thus we don't see them. But I sort of like Sun Guardian. I think it's a really cool way of having like an aggressive and big mid-range card that prioritizes you into passing because it'll eventually be bigger. Like in card gamers, you know, winning worlds. What did he win? He won an open. There are times where he doesn't want to put damage on Sun Guardian because he knows he can reliably increase the health of Sun Guardian, so there's no reason to attack with it if you're just going to put damage on it and eventually let it die. That play pattern, I think, is super interesting. And so I don't want Sun Guardian to be, like, devoid of that, so I think any sort of larger rework I don't want to happen to Sun Guardian. So I think minusing 1 health allows that sort of same idea to happen, but slows Sun Guardian down by a turn, and that's lovely for a card like Sun Guardian to slow it down by a turn for interaction against it. Karma. My hope is that Karma decides that capitalism is not within the purview of Ionia and thus shouldn't be permitted. I expect that she's just going to lose 1 health. I think that's a pretty relatively stock, understandable change. I don't think that's too surprising. Caustic. I honestly don't care that Caustic is flow. I think the flow part of Caustic is super unnecessary and shouldn't be there, but PNZ having board wipey tools is still interesting to me. I think there are ways that this gameplay pattern appeals to enough people such that it should be retained into the game. So I'd be willing to keep Caustic at 3 mana and have it as a flow thing and make BB decks interesting and have certain types of, like, you know, PNZ control have access to a somewhat awkward piece of removal, but somewhat okay piece of removal. It depends what decks you're fighting, right? I think that's a cool idea for a deck like a PNZ deck. And so I'm willing to keep Caustic as 3 mana. My expectation is they're going to increase it by 1 mana, though. This is what it's more likely to me. And I think this is a bigger nerf, and I think it's more interesting. More likely to impact the meta and such. If Caustic Rift was, like, staunchly disliked, they'll probably do this. But I would just want them to remove the flow tech. Drum Solo, again, this is like a stolen conch comment. I'm making a joke here. It should play a Drum Solo soundbite. Now, why is this a nerf? I don't know. But, you know, I want this to happen. I expect the flow just going to be reduced by 1. The fact that it's a 1 mana draw 2 is a little bit weird at the moment, so making it back into 3 mana seems fine, because flow is not the hardest thing to proc. Ambitious Cultist, a card that I'm surprised to see here. Ambitious Cultist has always been really good, but also, like, not the strongest Cultist card. Like, the weakest Cultist card, which is, like, Ambitious Cultist or Ice Veil Archer, or Ice Veil Cultist, is still stronger than, like, a lot of cards in other regions. But hitting Ambitious Cultist is really interesting. I like Ambitious Cultist a lot. I really like just that it's a big unit that generates a card. I think that's just cool. Maybe I'm just, like, boring, but I think a 4 mana 3/5 that generates a card is just cool. So I'm willing to make it like a 3/4, but I do really like Ambitious Cultist. My expectation is they're going to make the card cost 2 mana to get rid of, like, the sad states of, you know, enemy gamer generated a 0 mana Mystic Shot. That's the only way I lost here. How could I ever played around this? This is, like, a reduced frustration nerf, and this is a nerf that I think is more interesting, because I do like the idea that it's 0 mana. I think this is more fun to play. This is more fun to play against, right? That's the difference between those changes. Opulent Foyer. I don't enjoy playing this card. I'm willing to make it 4 mana. If I'm to nerf this card, I would make it 4 mana. Do I want to nerf this card? Not really. But if I was to nerf it, I'd nerf it by making it 4 mana. I think this is what everyone wants. I think this reduces frustration patterns. A lot of my expectations in this lower part is about reducing frustration patterns, right? Which are all of these, while all of these are sort of like what I would do because I don't mind them. So This is what I expect. Then Jansport, when he sent me his message, he was like, these are the buffs, these are the nerfs, and these are the changed inner way. So these are my changed inner ways changes. I think Prank should have more options for spells and landmarks and weapons. It kind of concerns me that like Prank only has one option for spells, landmarks, weapons. I want that to be two options so that you can't guarantee that you're going to add two cost to a spell. I think that guarantee is quite boring. So I want it to give spells. It could give anything super fleeting, but give spells super fleeting where it costs 0, but it gives them fleeting. That way it counters stuff like deny, but also you won't want to click on something like a treasure trash, and if they've got a hand where their hand could be something like double treasure trash, you don't want them to cost 0 mana, so you don't play Prank. I think this is very interesting. I'd be really curious to see how this play pattern feels if it got into the game, because I think this is so cool. My expectation is that it's going to do something like a minor tweak to how Prank works with like weapons or mana changes, right? Because I think the mana part is the main issue with Prank. So I expect if they're going to change it in a way to not be explicitly a nerf or a buff, it's going to be some sort of change here. Anyway, these are my thoughts. Managed to get through them in about 20 minutes. Overall, this patch interests me, and I'm curious to see how they deal with a lot of these things that confuse me, and specifically if they're going to do this half of the frustration reductions or this half of the enjoyment to play reductions, if that makes sense. But let's watch the live stream, and we're going to get a bunch of ads as always, but that's understandable. Hold on. Let's make sure we're not going to get super bored.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 4.4 patch balance updates. I am Riot09, aka Jules, and I'm joined with Ruben and Vriss.
Holy shit, is that Ruben? Oh my god, I love this guy. He created all of my favorite champions.
Over to Vriss first so that he can introduce himself. So
I'm kidding. My favorite champion is Galio, and that was clearly made by Devin Light.
Ideation.
This picture's quite humorous.
Some of the changes. Some eternal
Okay. Unbuffs. So they're gonna revert... No, don't revert Sun Guardian. Please, revert Karma. That's fine. That's what this is. It's a revert. And I guess Ash is a revert as well. A revert. I think those are the only cards that can get reverted that aren't the Leona package. Please don't make Sun Guardian back to being at 6 mana, 6/6 overwhelm. I nearly put that here in my hope, but then I realized I really enjoy the play pattern of the increasing health. Yo, okay, hold on. Let's do the thing. I got these right. Hell yeah. BH6. Copy the yup. Go here. Yup. Let's go. I'm not too surprised. I think these are relatively common, but hell yeah, it feels good.
I feel like once there's the context of all of the buffs and nerfs, I think things will make a little bit more sense. But let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Frank, do you want to talk about the top of the town?
Okay. That saddens me. Poor Pocket Aces never had the chance to have its day. That's a note, but it's sort of like what I expected. Do I have something for expectations? Yeah, I just write yep when I expect it. Hold on, never mind, I'm still winning. I usually write yep when I expect it, so good job, Spids. You did it, sadly so.
Samira Fizz deck, and that brings us to the next slide. Frank, do you want to bring us home here?
Sure, so yeah.
Ooh, +2 cost, huh? You know what, sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously this is wrong, but yeah. Interesting, okay, I don't inherently dislike this. I think that makes some sense. I mean, just going to 7 mana isn't going to change too much with the way Burblefish interacts. The more spells they introduce to the game, the more Burblefish will be fine, so... Sure. Be that way, I don't mind too much. And obviously, Inferno, we got that right, because it's hard to have any other changes for Inferno. But sure! Interesting. Wonder if this will become 10 mana at some point, just like the rest of the giants in the game, like, you know, Plaza Guardian and so forth.
That is, it is.
But cool, it makes Burblefish definitely have more of a... You need a more specific hand to justify putting Burblefish into your deck, and thus you can't, like, turn everything into a Burblefish deck. You need to be a bit more specific, I think. So this makes sense. It's a cool change. It's not some wild thing that makes it completely different.
Surely
so
not the only thing, because it is definitely not cheated and do explosive things that are very...
What is this Trundle timeline stuff? That's really humorous. I quite like this a lot.
difficult to interact with.
Anywho, let's get into the next change, Steve, because Samira Leona has been kind of tearing up too.
Oh my god, I got it correct. Who could have assumed such a scenario would ever occur? Makes sense. These are the... I forgot to update this. These are the most obvious form of this change, right? Not too surprising. Let's see what they have to say about it. I know, like, my reaction is simply, oh, okay, and then I move on. But what else do you want me to say?
Yeah, so this
We are pretty hopeful that, like, we tested like 5 different iterations of like Sun Guardian stats to make sure we found one where we felt like it would still get to do its thing. So definitely.
5 different iterations of the stats for Sun Guardian? So what, like 4 mana stuff? 1, 3, 1, 4, 2, 1, 3, 1? Okay. Curious what these stat lines are.
You're not trying to just like kill.
Like 5 is a lot.
all right.
Yeah. Next.
Sorry, they just quickly talked about Shelly. I'm not going to include it in the video, I think. Unless I did, then too bad. I think that Shelly point is really interesting. Like, you can hear multiple aspects of what changes the deck. I think that way explained makes me agree that Shelly shouldn't have been hit. I do like the idea of going for the Burble stuff, and I think Shelly has some interesting gameplay patterns that aren't necessarily tied to Burblefish, that just haven't been explored, because Burblefish is obviously the way to go about that. Now, whether those patterns are powerful or not and sees meta play doesn't really matter. The point is that when you're leveraged into going into Burblefish, just because you're running Shelly and you want to do some sort of spell spam stuff, and it's going to be so powerful on turn 5 or 6 because Burble is cheap. It makes it a bit of a unfun and annoying thing to go into against. Deciding what half of that you want to nerf, I think, is interesting. I think I agree that the Burble half should be nerfed as opposed to the Shelly half. But obviously, Shelly is like a frustrating card in some capacities, and it's definitely one of the things that when you see their enemy board and you're seeing the Shelly bust up, it's very easy to blame that card over other options, right? But yeah, also Karma, correct? Good job, Spid.
We just want it to be more of an investment to put Karma into play, especially if you ever have to put her in before 10 to really give your opponent a chance to remove her. And right now, when she comes down on 10, she has 5 health. And 5 health is like, might as well be a million a lot of the times. And in the past, we used to see people play more protection spells for their Karma when she didn't have that health. And we're hoping that this change will either let the opponent actually be able to remove Karma sometimes before too much of a pop-off occurs, or make it so the Karma player has to make those deck slot concessions and go back to playing protective spells for her.
Cool.
Said a lot of words about like wanting to be forced into running protection spells. I don't think that's too important for the Karma deck. The way the Karma deck plays, you don't really need that. Seems fine. I'm not upset by this nerf. I think when people think of a Karma nerf, like they see that this clearly says, okay, Karma is too strong, we should do something about it. Right, this is what this is saying, or maybe not necessarily too strong, either too strong or unfun to fight against, right? That's what you do with change, because it's too strong or it's unfun to fight. And so seeing this, given that, like, axiom, right? Karma is either too fun or not too fun. Karma is either not fun to fight or too strong. Therefore, we should nerf her. People are going to see this nerf and think it's mostly minor, and therefore you haven't fulfilled the obligation of that first axiom. I don't really mind that this is the nerf. I think this is fine. But I think it's interesting to see how seeing this provides a first axiom but doesn't accomplish a second axiom that this inherently argues for, which I think is interesting. Oh, so they do make it flow cost 2 less. Interesting. I got Drum Solo right, obviously. But, okay. I'm going to say that's a note, because this should say, like, a 2 here, right? So I was close. Maybe I can give myself, like, a yellow close. But, like, kind of far as well at the same time. I would say I'm not really close enough. Let's go for orange. Not close. There we go. Cool. I think this is interesting. I definitely prefer my change for this half of it, but I think this is better than this change as well, I think. And in making flow a more desirable thing to go for, I think it's interesting. And you're redirecting what needs flow and what doesn't need flow with this, which is interesting.
Yes. The big thing about this is this makes it a little bit more telegraphed. Like, as somebody playing on ladder, when your opponent has played 2 spells, you kind of know, oh, this is like maybe a Caustic Rift round, versus when it's 4 mana, it can't even be played on round 2 anymore, which really just makes it generically less of a good...
Can't be played on round 2 anymore. Interesting point, Ruben. Yeah. Okay. I like that a lot more. Now that I see that, I really like that a lot now.
But specifically when you're flowing, it's still... Yeah.
Ah, 0 cost this round only. That's something they've done for a few cards in this game. I think cards like Trail of Evidence are like that. So, cool. I'm going to put this as another close but no cigar, right? Close-ish. Yeah, yeah. Because I did get the fact that it would cost 2 eventually, just not, immediately. And again, it's the same logic that I was talking about earlier, wherein they want to prevent awkward, distasteful game states where you're not able to play around this 0 mana card, just like they talked about with the previous card. Interesting. Cool change. I do like Ambitious Cultist. I'm glad it wasn't a stat change. I really like the 4 mana 3/5 stat line.
Yeah, this is actually...
Why are a lot of people distasteful towards this? Interesting. There's a lot of people that are distasteful towards this change. I really like this change. Interesting. This is one of my favorite things I've seen today. Okay, sure. So they have bundled up the text a little bit more. but interesting. No longer mix a band with Scout or Rally. Sure. Interesting. I kind of like it costing 4 mana more than that. And I also kind of like... Wait, hold on. Is this what I said? I think... No, because it still summons one at the start. Interesting. Okay, so this is like a note. But, okay. It still allows you to do the Gwen thing where you start your open attack and you have a unit that you can give the first half of Hollow to, and then you've got Gwen of the second half of Hollow. It still does things you want to do with Gwen without making Demacia Gwen or Noxus Gwen too powerful. Right? Specifically with like Katarina stuff. I'm glad because I never liked this card in Red Gwen. I've always disliked this card just like emotionally. Nothing in terms of like power. Like it's not like I thought this card was underpowered. I just thought this card wasn't fun to play with. Compared to other options in Red Gwen with the way I like to play Red Gwen. So I'm glad to see this card get changed in this way. I'm still going to prefer not to play Opulent Foyer, so I don't mind. But interesting that this is the way in which they do it. It's cool. They get to retain the summon thing, but also make it so it only occurs once per 2 turns. Which is cool, because I think that's like the main frustration, that it wasn't occurring once every 2 turns, it was occurring thrice every turn, right? So, sure. Sure, cool way of changing it. I like this. I like this for reducing the frustration patterns that a lot of people were experiencing with this, while still retaining the when I'm summoned, summon a Ghastly Band. I think that's cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Alright, so this is what it was. I'm sad it's not super fleeting, but sure. Sure, this is exactly what I was hoping for. Something along these lines. I'm interested that they removed this from the unit pool. I kind of liked this in the unit pool, but sure. Changing this to +1 cost makes a lot of sense. I think like the main frustration play pattern with Prank was the +2 cost, especially since it was guaranteed on units, equipments, landmarks, and spells. Although they haven't written spells here, so maybe it's still +2 cost for spells. And they're making it -2 strength invulnerable. Oh, so right, okay, so that's why this is going, because it's still in -2 strength invulnerable. Sure, so it should be like -1 strength and can't block, -1 strength and can't attack or something like that. And the can't attack isn't one of them. I think it's something like can't block and vulnerable, and there might be one more, but I don't remember what it is. But sure. Okay. I like all of these. I'm curious if they just forgot spells.
Quickly, a philosophy around pranks. I think for a long time, pranks weren't working in the way that we, not necessarily not working the way they wanted to, but a lot of the power of pranks was skewed in the +2 cost. And we often found really frustrating situations when you got a landmark or a unit +2 cost that felt really, really bad, right? It felt like, oh, you're taking away somebody's play on curve, where at least for spells, you can bank mana, right? And that got us thinking, well...
Oh, okay, so they're intentionally keeping it +2 cost for spells. I guess, like, the +2 cost on units and landmarks is a higher variance thing. Right, so that reduces the variance, while the +2 cost on spells is less of a high variance change. It still changes a lot, but it's less high variance. And so it's much more acceptable, especially since spells have a unique mana pool, funnily enough, in LOR. So that makes sense. I thought to me, the most frustrating part was always the +2 cost on spells, not on the units or landmarks. I never really bothered about that. Primarily because that wasn't a particularly common thing to find, because it was 4 options for units at the very least. And landmarks are rare enough such that the prank landmark interaction isn't too popular. It doesn't occur in enough games for it to create enough of a frustration in play patterns. So, cool. Interesting. I think I agree, provided that logic. Do I agree with the logic? I think the answer is yes. But it's not where I would have prioritized my logic had this been given to me. So I think this is a good change.
Well, how can we improve pranks? Because a lot of the times when you're playing pranks, your goal is to just prank tons of spells, right? And we're like, well, what if we made the unit debuffs a bit better? So that kind of led us to thinking, well, the -2 attack debuff on prank is actually something that is rarely selected, rarely used. Let's remove that from the pool. So you'll no longer be able to hit that anymore. We're adjusting the cost on units, landmarks, and equipment. So anything that's not a spell won't be able to get +2 cost. It'll only be able to get +1 cost. And then we buffed the vulnerable debuff to be -2, -0, and vulnerable. So instead of that -2 attack, you get both that and vulnerable. And then the last prank, of course, for units is the one that makes units can't block. And this just played really well in our testing. I don't know if we expect this to be something that is meta right away, but this is the kind of change that Standard actually helped us make. Now that Curious Shellfolk is rotated, that gives us some space to make new prank cards or even buff pranks without doing anything too gross, since usually Shellfolk is kind of the card that prevents us from doing something like this. So when you're playing with pranks now, you're just gonna have a lot more interesting options, especially when you hit units, because it's not always gonna be feast or famine, I hit +2 cost or not. You're gonna have a bit better unit debuffs like giving vulnerable, and this actually plays kind of well in aggressive decks because the -2, -0 on vulnerable or can't block pranks now are something that more aggressive Vandal City decks can use. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at here. We're calling this more of an adjustment because obviously now you can't prank landmarks up to cost, but that was really a functionality we don't want for pranks in the long term. So we're really happy to roll out this change. Whether or not it has meta impact, I think from the design side, we're really happy about it.
Ruben seems excited about this change, as am I. This is my favorite change so far. This is definitely the most interesting one, and I like the philosophy that's gone behind it. Very, very interesting.
Cool. And with that, we get into buffs. So Frank, do you want to talk about some of these buffs coming to Targon?
Oh, okay. So these are both wrong. Like, demonstrably so. These are very, very wrong. Nope. I guess this is a nope. This can be a nope. We got that wrong. That's fine. I'm not too upset. Cloven Way is a nope. Sickness is a nope. Sure. Let's... Okay. Permanent elusive gives an ally elusive. I think I mentioned this vaguely once. I'm not that interested in this idea. Like a 5-mana 3/3 elusive, give another thing elusive. This interests me a lot less. I actually think this is a less fun card. It's probably more powerful just because it's a permanent elusive, so you can do something like curve this on turn 5 to buff up a non-elusive unit and retain this as an elusive. It makes more sense for consistent elusive beatdown decks as opposed to OTK elusive beatdown decks or OTK finishes with Nightfall. This is more of a consistent method of trying to deal damage sneakily. I think this is definitely a different desirable game plan of trying to like do sneaky attacks as opposed to a single massive, I'm gonna subvert your expectations by having sickness. It's just a different style of doing sneakiness. One's OTK-esque and one's, Death by 1,000 Cuts-esque, and this is obviously going for the Death by 1,000 Cuts-esque line. Both are interesting gameplay patterns. I don't really mind which one's in the game, so it's not too big of a deal. I sort of liked the emotional way in which Cygnus was played prior, but as soon as I play Cygnus in this expansion, I'm sure I'll also like how Cygnus plays this time around. It's just different methods of having the emotional and gameplay perspective of, elusive... what's the term? The term about going through an attack. I'm forgetting a term here about the thing that Overwhelming, Fearsome, and Brash does. Avoiding stuff. There's a word I'm looking for. Cloven Way is very similar. I like the gameplay patterns of Cloven Way. I'm scared at 4 mana it could be a little bit more frustrating than desired, because Cloven Way can be a frustrating card if it's not costed appropriately. It obviously having less stats is interesting. It makes it want to play in a slightly different form of deck. I think these are cool changes. I'm very, very curious to see how these feel in game, because these to play, not to fight. To fight is less important to me. To play, I think these are going to be really interesting cards to see exactly how the feeling of playing them is, both in power and both in gameplay pattern enjoyment. But I've got some trepidatious excitement for it. I think these could be interesting. And while we have lost something, a little bit, I don't think it's the worst thing to have lost it. So interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
for sure. To power. So kind of an adjustment overall, but mostly just trying to bring him down in the curve, make him a better threat on his own. Similar thing with Cloven Way, 1 cost off the top, losing some stats in exchange, and just hopeful that this combination of elusive and overwhelm.
He said Frisk said that Cygnus is a better threat on his own. Sure, he's less threatening, but he used to be a big threat. He used to be like 11 elusive damage, deal with it. That's what Cygnus used to say, and now he says, possibly 7 elusive damage, but at least you have to deal with 3 over time. It's definitely more of a consistent threat, but it's less of a big threat. I sort of disagree with his explicit wording there.
Like earlier and more reliably on the curve. So this
Hell yeah! A new line of text. Nightfall reduced that cost. Sure, I'm happy. Give me the text. I'm happy with the text. I will say hoped. I think that's what I used to do here, right? If I got my hope. Yeah, I got my hope. Hoped. I need it at the line. Hell yeah, I'm really happy about this. This is exactly what I wanted. I don't really care what the line of text says. This line of text is cool. I like the line of text. It's not even that big of a line of text thing. Funny meme to put in here, sure. I love Moondreamer. I think she's super cool. I really like her stat line. I really like Invoke. I really like everything that Moondreamer has. So having this text could have literally said, I am a dragon, and I would have been like, hell yeah, you go for it, Moondreamer. So I'm happy to see anything here. This is fine. I'm not like pogged out by it. I'm not unpogged out by it. Create some interesting gameplay patterns where you've got like an 8-mana Great Beyond or a 9-mana Scourge, or more importantly, something like a 5-mana Fallen Comet. All of those are fine. This card's good, but what's more cool to me is that there's a line of text. I'm really happy about that.
this Targon.
Oh, hush. Hush. Hush like shh, hush. Okay. Hush. Sure. I'll accept Hush. Interesting. I like these. I like these a lot. Targonian, I love Targon. I like these cards. I really like Invoke. Like, I like everything about Targon. So, you know, this is not what I wanted, but it is what I want. Weirdly enough. It's not what I said as a hope, but it's what I like. So, hell yeah. I'm gonna do the red. But normally when I like it anyway, I did a smiley face. That's typically what I rate. So, oh, well then I guess I should also do a smiley face here and a smiley face. Actually, I think I still would have preferred this. Yeah, okay. I really, really like this. I want to play Targon decks quite badly now. I love this. This is so cool. Hush concerns me for power reasons, but Hush, like, I'm going to run Targonian Tailstones as opposed to Hush in a fair few decks now, right? I don't know if it's going to be in every deck. I think Hush might be better as a tech card in Pantheon Varus than Targonian Tailstones will be a tech card in Pantheon Varus. But stuff like Varus, Pantheon Fiora, I think you could argue a Targonian Tailstones as an emergency blessing of Targon, and more importantly, an emergency Great Beyond, or an emergency removal card, or whatever. I think Behold the Infinite's underrated as, like, 9 mana single target removal as a concern option. Now, obviously, every single time I've looked at a Tailstone, I'm like, you know, there are situations where you want to play 9 mana Weapons of the Lust, totally. And then no one plays the card, and then I'm like, eating myself. But I like this. I really like Targonian Tailstones. I want to see this played a lot. I want to play this card quite badly. Very cool buff. I'm really happy to see it. I would have liked Sunblessed Vigor, but I mean, it's already got Blessing of Targon. Maybe it's too much to have 2 buff spells in one.
Buff, Targon
But I really like this.
has kind of been one of
I love this. I'm really enjoying these changes. These are really nice.
Cool.
I'm a big fan.
All right.
Oh my god, I was fucking right. Fine, I still don't care, but for something I was so down on, I'm glad I was right. But okay, sure.
Next is
This was the change I didn't want. I actually really actively didn't want this change. It does the same thing where first ascended ally equals 3. Like, that is the same change, basically, except 0 ascended allies means 5 and 2 ascended allies means 1 instead of 0. So, like, this is less variance, right? What I've said is more variance. This is less variance. So I understand why a lot of their changes are variance opposed. So I'm not surprised by this, but it saddens me because I really did like my change for this. But sure, okay, this one's a note. But okay, I'm not surprised by this. This is just like a less variance version of the thing I was suggesting, right? Can't hit this from Anomaly anymore. That's very true, Robo Master. God, I love Robo Master. He's so cool. Well, I got that one right. Fine. They didn't. Jansport did put this in this section when he sent it to me. I just put it here because it's also Shreeman. So I'm not surprised I haven't gone through that yet. But yeah, okay. I'm not too surprised by this. There was very little else you could do. I don't know if this is necessary, but okay.
with rotation.
Lots of people dislike this. I find that interesting. I don't hate it. I think if you wanted to buff SI control, this is a great way to buff SI control. If SI control should be buffed, then this change for Soul Harvest is good. I think, provided that if statement, the then statement makes sense. And I don't think there are many other forms of the then statement you can do outside of stuff like Grasp. And I don't know, what, Vengeance? Like, there aren't that many things that can fill that then statement. And this is a very, very good option for filling that then statement. I really like this.
It's just like, you shouldn't have to pay for that. So
my trepidation prior was that I don't necessarily agree with the if statement. I don't think that this is the way to buff SI control. I think if you want to buff SI control, I'd rather give SI control an SI unit that they want. Which sounds weird. I want like a control unit, I think. That's kind of what I'm looking for SI. So we've got stuff like the Buru units, but those are mid-range, like, I will hit you units. I want like a good control unit. Stuff like Reggie is the kind of stuff I want in SI. And not like explicitly just like 2 mana 2/1, create a random SI card in hand. Like, I want a unit that you can proactively play that gives you stall out tools in SI. It's not really an SI's region identity, but sure. Provided you want to buff a spell, I don't mind buffing the spell. That's fine. Okay. You know what? That actually ain't too bad. That's surprisingly alright. I mean, like, 9 mana card. Try to play 9 mana card challenge. Fail. Can't occur in a video game. But interesting. Sorry, I think I want you to be... Yeah, hold on. Just fixing this. Okay, I don't think Kendrick and the Infernal is that bad. I do agree that prior, like, it as a tempo play just wasn't a thing. So one of the issues with, like, expensive cards is that you need them to be a tempo play. And if you don't have any other dragons on the field, or even if you have 1 or 2 dragons on the field, this isn't a big enough tempo play. But +4/+4 is a big tempo play. Like, now you've played For Demacia. Now you've played, when I say For Demacia, I mean FOUR Demacia. Champion Strength. So I think this is good. I think this is a good change. I don't know if it makes Kendrick and the Infernal strong enough, but it hampers the issue of this not being a tempo play, and now it is a tempo play, and that should be good for how you want this card to interact with boards in this scenario, right?
Yeah, this is the kind of thing where like we could look to make hydrogen cheaper and have a smaller buff, but that kind of goes against like what the giant cool dragons is. So we're really just saying like if you could pay 9 mana and slap this bad boy into play, you're gonna get a massive reward.
It's
based. I don't know how much I'm cutting this out, but Vrish basically said that it's much better than making this a 7 or 8 mana card that has a slightly less big of a buff or less big stats. Like this card should say big dragon. Ah, it even says here, dragons go grrr. I thought the meme was brr, but okay, grrr. Dragons go grrr is a thing that you want in a video game, so I'm not surprised that they went for more grrr than less grrr.
The easiest way to...
Okay. You know what? This is a quality of life change for Teemo. Like for when I'm running Seth, because if you're running 6, you have to at some point run Renekton or Sivir or something, and so giving the stats on the smaller units makes sense. I think this is a really well thought out change, like provided the if statement of we want to make it so the low rolls aren't as low, this is a great one, while the high rolls of ASOL don't change, right? So low rolls get less low, high rolls don't change as much. Good change for that goal. I don't know if that goal is the goal I would have gone for, but sure. That doesn't disappoint me at all. I'm not surprised by this change. I'm not surprised in the sense that, wow, this has really shocked me, but it's a cool change. It's not expected. But I like it. I like this following the if statement to go to the then statement of that's how we should change
Basically,
the card.
the goal here is
interesting. To be fair, she is everywhere and everyone. Okay, James. I think I mentioned this when going over the cards, but didn't think it would be likely. But sure, this was one of the things that could occur. I'm not too surprised. This is a thing. And like she's already locked, this card's already locked behind a pseudo reputation package because you need What's Her Bucket to strike. So locking it further explicitly isn't intrinsically necessary because her sort of package inherently requires that condition to be half fulfilled half the time anyway. So sure, I'm not the biggest fan of this change, and I really enjoyed like frostbiting to destroy it. But at the same time, that's what I expected them to get rid of, and they have gotten rid of that just in a more favorable way for the Ashe LeBlanc player or the LeBlanc player. So sure, this is more enjoyable to play as the LeBlanc player, and against it, any change you were going to do probably involved a change that looks like this, even if it's not explicitly this. So fair call, fair call. I don't
targeted buff.
I'm
I would
surprised.
say essentially mirror image. Yeah, I will. I mean, I think one of our goals on lore is just for champions' gameplay dreams to be realizable, right? And one thing that LeBlanc really does is create like multiple mirror images, right? And the fact that it was sort of hamstrung to like a more reputation style deck really hurt her ability to do some crazy combos. So ultimately, regardless of the deck, like honestly, regardless of the decks in standard, we think that the champion's gameplay dream being realizable is more important, which is why we do something like this. But it does.
I agree. Like gameplay fantasy is an important aspect of things. I'm not upset by this in terms of gameplay fantasy. I think this is really good for gameplay fantasy.
Buff essentially the.
Oh, so she's a giant. They're a giant. They're 10 mana that cost 1 less. You know what? Sure. I do miss these 10 mana cards that cost a lot, and this is a cool way of doing a giant effect for Banner City where it's based on multi-regions. Don't know why this is 3. I guess that's for balance. There are worlds where this is active on 5. In the deck you want to play this, it's not impossible to imagine this being active on 5, and it's very likely for this to be active on 6, and you're already playing a deck that involves cheap units and impact units. So I think this is a good change. I think this card is fine. It's going to have all the issues of giants where your bad draws are really bad and your good draws are not improved enough by Bandle Gunners, right? Only decks like Plaza Guardian really, that are all in on the Plaza Guardian really need that. So like Sandstone Chimera and Scuttlegeist, right? Your low rolls with those draws are just awful, and your high rolls with Scuttlegeist and Sandstone Chimera aren't high enough for you to justify that as a deck building restriction and inclusion, when you could just be running a card that doesn't have a restriction and doesn't create those low variance options, right? Like your low rolls in those variant scenarios. I like Bandle Gunners. I think it's really cool. I actually am going to miss old Bandle Gunners a lot. I really liked the 8 mana 7/7 for impact. It felt janky, but it felt fun. It was one of my favorite cards in the video game. So it's definitely different now. I'm going to miss old Bandle Gunners, but I understand the logic. The logic doesn't surprise me. It makes sense. And I'll be curious to see how it feels like to play. So, like, I will never experience old Bandle Gunners ever again. That's just, like, gone from history. But in the near future, we could experience new Bandle Gunners that could be interesting. It's similar to rotation, right? Like, we have experienced a TF world. TF world was very fun. Now we're experiencing a world where we actually have access to interesting draw tools. We might miss TF world, but now we've got access to a new world, either of which could be fun, right? I enjoyed old Bandle Gunners. Maybe I like new Bandle Gunners. We can't know which one's more fun, and more fun doesn't really matter because I think it's the most fun to have access to both at some point in life, right? So they've rotated old Bandle Gunners. They've got new Bandle Gunners, but I'm not upset by that.
So this is
Cool
actually
change.
a small. We designed it to keep the spell shield, keep the impact stacks, but now the cost just scales down 1 for each multi-region ally you summon. Basically, think it's like the multi-region.
Oh, hold on. I thought this was for each region. So multiple Owlcats minuses 2. I thought it was like you have to have Grumble Slug and Owlcat and Arena Mechacaster and Protoporo. This card's even better than I thought. The things I was saying still applies. The whole old versus new. We can only experience one reality at once. Blah 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 blah. I mean, maybe you guys can experience multiple, but I'm unfortunately stuck to one reality at once. So actually, I can actually even make that joke make more sense with Aphantasia. So hell yeah, my joke makes even more sense. But I think that I don't mind this change. I think this change is okay. And it'll be more interesting, because now you can get it on turn 5 much more reliably if you can double summon Owlcats, right? I think it'll still be more likely to be on turn 6, but the lower rolls with this that I was imagining are less low than the lower rolls are going to be in reality. So cool, this card just got slightly more interesting just because I've noticed it's each multi-region ally as opposed to each region ally. Okay, so it fixes the fact that it's not a token by drawing one. You know, a cheap card that does minor effect, you want it to draw one. It's like Guiding, it's like Pale. I don't hate it. This is a good buff to the card. I've set my hopes up high by suggesting this. This is a high hope. And this was also a low expectation, so it's somewhere in the middle. This is still a nope. I think this is a good change for the card. I think the card does want to be along the lines of Guiding and so forth. And obviously Guiding, if it was a 1-mana heal 2, is an awful card, right? Pale Cascade is a +1/+1 that doesn't draw is an awful card. So, you know, +1 cost, let it draw is a perfectly redeemable thing to go for. And I'm not surprised that they've done it this way. It'll be fine. It'll be alright. I don't hate this as an option. It's obviously worse than Guiding and Pale because it's unsure and all that sort of stuff. It's better off things like Ambitious Cultist and what have you. It's better off things like Song Spinner. Fine. You could run this as in a Seraphine deck as a second time trick, right? But it's not what I wanted. I really like my idea for Flash Bombs, and I really want that idea to happen at some point. But sure, fine. It's a good buff. It's not as sexy as other possible buffs.
Yeah, throw.
Yep. Big SI unit that has a cool but weird effect gets -1 cost. Who would have thought? Jesus Christ, I've gotten most of these wrong. Wait, hold on. This is a yep. Hold on. I don't know how long that's been there for. Were any of these also yeps? I don't think so. I think that was the only yep that I fucked up, right? Yeah, okay. Sure, but, you know, SI card does SI -1 cost. Who's surprised? Not me.
Yeah, but
Told ya. Told ya. God, okay. I'm not surprised. This is exactly what I thought they would do. Minor buff. Do a minor buff. Not surprised about it at all. I'd still prefer this one. Doesn't surprise me that they did that. I feel happy that I mind read them. That this is the sort of change they would do. After failing to mind read like a bunch of times. But sure.
Yeah. All right.
That seems to be everything. I'll include stuff if there's interesting questions, but that might just be everything. Cool changes. I'm not going to do a summary of thoughts because you saw my thoughts. I did them as they happened. If you wanted to hear what my thoughts were, you should have listened more. So sure, I'll just
So a lot of
watch
people,
this now.
myself included, have gone here supporting us.
Alright, there are a few questions about Leona and aggro and starter decks. They're all fine. If you want to know about them, you can watch it yourself. This is not a replay system. This is me saying, oh, that's cool, and then moving on to the next card. Thanks for watching. See you some other time. Bye.